also filled out being in Saline. I pulled out some more Saline images than were in the book, so it's going to be that way. My interest in interurbans and trolleys goes back many years. I believe that the interurbans were still running when I was a little fella. My earliest memory is when in October of 1928, when the Graf Zeppelin flew over Kansas City. We were visiting my grandfather then, and we were sitting up in the park over the museum, and I said something about the big fish, and that's part of the family legend that Mark said looks like a big fish. And I got a postcards canceled by that on the Zeppelin from that day as part of my history. That's all crazy stuff. My interest in trains follows that. The interurbans died soon after that. And so there was nothing but tracks in Ann Arbor when I was growing up. Trains, I've always been after the trains, and so this has been a hobby for many years. And in doing so, I've collected a certain amount of debris, which is in many file drawers in the upstairs in the house. We're living in the house that I grew up in, so things don't get thrown out very much. Well, that's all immaterial. Well, let's get going to the show. I've got a little pointer here, and it's got buttons on it, and if I push the wrong button, the wrong thing happens. So let's see what we get. Okay. Is that working? No. Oh, I know what. You know, it's got a little gimmick here that I stick into the computer so I can talk to it. This is all technology, you know. You know, I come here half an hour early to get things set up, and I always forget something. Like I forgot to bring more books. That isn't going in. Here we go. Is it going? Yep. Oh, good. There we go. All right, that was easy, wasn't it? Okay, so let's get going on this show. A little bit of background. Interurbans had their place. They were really it was a lively financial bubble about that time, around 1890, why transportation, rural transportation, intercity transportation was seriously handicapped by the character of the roads. And here you've got a picture of a nice little buggy and a standard rural road, packed dirt, which was a mess in the spring. Wintertime, freight sledges, and this is from the Michigan Asylum team. Now, I don't know which asylum it was. There were about 4 or 5 of them about that time. There was the Eloise Asylum and the Coldwater Asylum and the Traverse City Asylum. And some of the one in Traverse City was designed by Gordon Lloyd, and it's been converted into condos, you see. It's kind of impressive. Before the trolley, city streets looked like this. They were muddy, and the horses were hauled up to the hitching posts, and you had the drain under the horses going down to the drain in the corner. And I just noticed as I was, this is Ann Arbor, made in Washington Street. Intercity transportation was by steam railroads, and they were fast, and particularly the Michigan Central was fast. It was one of the fastest and best run lines in the country. Detroit to Chicago, double track and fast trains. And this is from a postcard that I picked up was it's clearly, it was Ann Arbor cancellation, it's clearly an Ann Arbor scene. The first electric trolleys in Ann Arbor came in 1890. The Ann Arbor Street Railway Company saw the potential for getting some local transportation. The view is on the corner of State Street and North University. Over here is Old Haven Hall, which is a building that burned down about 1960. And it's now an empty spot. But they also had a car barn fire and lost all but one car. And so they ordered new trolleys. That was in January, and by September they had these new cars. These aren't very modern looking. They really are basically a horse car body. Electric motors on the trucks and a controller up here in front and a handbrake here. The handbrake, he twists it around and it winds up the chain on the stem down there and pulls the brake shoes against the wheels and slows the car down. It doesn't stop very fast. The original Ann Arbor routes shown here started at the Michigan Central Station, went up Detroit Street, down Main Street, up William Street, and then circled the campus out on North University, out to Washtenaw, around behind where the Rock sits now. I won't go to the Rock, that's my neighborhood and it's awful. And went back down Hill Street and down William Street. They also had an extension down this planned street for Olivia Hall's addition. The fairgrounds used to be here on Hill Street, and Louis P. Hall had a house here on the corner, the Baldwin House, on the corner of Washtenaw and Hill. And they didn't like the fairgrounds so close. It had undesirable types part of the year when they were having horse racing. And so they made a deal with the city to move the fairgrounds down here on where Wells Street is. It's now the Burns Park behind Tappan School, and the loop of trees is where the track was. And so they developed Olivia B. Hall's property here, and when they got the franchise down proposed Lincoln Avenue here, which is where they went. And they built the car barn down here. The first car barn was way up here on Detroit Street. They built the car barn on the corner of Lincoln and Wall Street for the streetcars. Later on, they extended it down to Packard. Packard became the access to Ypsilanti. The little cars, the little early cars, went all the way down to the Michigan Central Station. Here's the Broadway Bridge in back. And the car came down, circled down this way. And I don't have the exact details, but I think one car got away and bumped into the station. And besides which, they weren't very powerful and they had trouble climbing the grade up to Broadway and Detroit Street. So they stopped running all the way down. Now what? Okay. Ann Arbor, a few years, 10 years, 15 years later, has been paved in brick. I can tell this is 1908 because the Glazer building has been built. It's still standing there. This is Liberty Street. And the car line right down the middle of Main Street. 1891. Junius Beale and his friends, Hemphill and Glover, built a dummy line from Ann Arbor to Ypsilanti along the Packard Road right-of-way. It was easy to build these lines because they could just get a franchise from the Pittsfield Township. They gave them a right to build a street railway down Packard Road right-of-way. So they laid the tracks, got a Porter steam engine with a cab on it. The cab was supposed to prevent scaring the horses, because when the if you had the feeling was, and I don't know how real it was, that if you had a chugga choo-choo coming down the street like that the horses would get upset and take off. And a runaway horse was a real risk because it would tip the wagon over and you were in big trouble. So they would put a cab around it, and those were called a steam dummy. So there's the steam out there, and you can, if you look closely, you can see the driver down here with a couple of, trailer cars on back. And here's the steam dummy chugging away. It's just turned the corner off Washington Street. It's going up across the street by the old Ypsilanti High School. Quite a nice building there. That was taken down about 1922, and they built a yellow brick building in the same block in the Ypsi High School, which has been turned into retirement community when they built their new high school out on Packard by Hewitt. Besides which, on this picture, here's the curve from Washington Street onto Cross Street. And you can also see the curve going around this way that went over to the Michigan Central Station, which we will see in a minute. So this was a railroad, a street railroad, and they ran it down the street of Ypsilanti, across Cross Street to and down Washington Street. On Washington Street, it went all the way down to Harriet Street on the south side of Ypsilanti. And they had a horse car that ran up and down Washington Street and turned the corner there at Cross Street and went over to the station. This is the only picture that we've got of the horse car in Ypsilanti. This was after the 1892 tornado, which ripped through Ypsilanti and made a big mess. And the Ypsilanti Historical Society has a wonderful collection of photographs, big photographs, of damage to places from that tornado. So here's Ypsi. The original line came in from Packard and went down Harriet Street with a branch to the station. When they started expanding, when they built to Detroit along Michigan Avenue, and then in 1899 the branch to Saline. 1896, the street railway decided to get modern and they electrified. So they became, instead of the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti Street Railway, the Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti Electric Railway. If you go into Myers, Thrifty Acres, why they have a big picture like this as you get up the steps toward the men's room. 1896 or so, they got the franchises to build the street railway along Michigan Avenue all the way into downtown Detroit, and then it became the Detroit, Ypsilanti, and Ann Arbor Railroad. This is one of their new cars. There's several interesting things about it. The platform, there was an open platform in back, and there was also access up front. Here's the guy sitting in the baggage compartment relaxing. We see two trolley poles here. One of them is hauled down and one of them is sticking up because they metered the electricity as they were going along the tracks of the Detroit Citizens Railway so that they could pay for their contract rate per mile. So they'd use one trolley pole in the country and another trolley pole going through Detroit. Here's Ypsilanti again. They call it Congress Street, which was an east-west street in Ypsilanti, and it still is an east-west street in Ypsilanti, but they've renamed it Michigan Avenue to make it connecting with Michigan Avenue, Detroit, and going on down Chicago Road, which was the territorial road laid out in about 1812 or so as a military road. But Congress Street in Ypsi still goes west from where it intersects Michigan Avenue. The car barn is along the river. There's the Huron River Bridge here, and the car barn had 3 tracks over here, and then it had a repair shop here, offices upstairs, and the dispatcher in the middle. Oops, go ahead. I put this in because it's kind of interesting. It is from the Detroit, Ypsilanti, and Ann Arbor Railroad, so it was after 1901, 1896, 1898. Along Packard Road here, and they crossed the Detroit, Hillsdale, and Southwestern Railroad, which became the Lakeshore, Michigan Southern. And this picture shows the conductor standing by the pole here, and he's talking to the dispatcher on the new telephone dispatching system. The very latest thing, technology moves ahead. Up to that point, as you probably remember, the steam railroads were dispatching by telegraph, which was Morse code. And you go into the station, you hear the clickety click, 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 click from the agent's room, because the steam railroads were still using Morse code really into the 30s or 40s. They hadn't yet gone to, they were starting to use telephone also. It's a far cry from microwave, but it was the latest thing at that time. Well, the Ypsilanti and Saline Electric Railway was projected by Hemphill and his Glover, and they built from Ypsilanti out to Saline, and I think they had at that time the idea of building street railways and interurban lines was very, very exciting, and the idea was you could just lay your track in 12 months and get there. And I think they had images of going on down to Hillsdale, compete with the Detroit, Hillsdale, and Southwestern. This is the same view. This is the Rentschler Farm crossing here. And there's that dip behind there, and over here is Maple, and then Beamless Road coming out this way. There's the steeple of the Lutheran Church in Saline. But this was Territorial Road, which was, as I say, built as a military road to Chicago. And the street railway is built right on the right-of-way of the road. So you have you have the wagon track here and the railroad track there. It's all on the same area. This was a lot more reliable. You didn't have the problem with mud and so forth. So it was very appealing, and they could just move their crew in, drop down ties, stick the rail on the ties, cross the creek down here with a little bridge. I guess there's the little bridge. And you got a railroad, fast, you know. And when they got their contracts, when they got their franchise, they promised to be running within 12 months. That was how fast they were building. Well, here's some of the old postcards. This is downtown Saline, East Chicago Street. Now you see, is it Chicago Road? Is it Michigan Avenue? It was East Chicago, or is it Main Street? This one calls it Chicago. And here's the crossing of Ann Arbor and Milan Roads. And the tracks are continuing right past there. And I can't really see on this postcard overhead wire, but it was clear that the intention was to continue on through town. It never went that far. The interurban is pulled in on the siding by the waiting room. We've got more pictures there. There's the waiting room. You know the name of this block here, I don't. This siding here was for the express, and that was beyond the books, the book building here. There's the waiting room here called the DYNA. Within a year after it was built, why it was absorbed by the Detroit, Ypsilanti, and Ann Arbor. Here's a little wagon they're using to get the express off the urban car. That's the wrong button. I just realized that one turns off the screen. Isn't that nice? I'm not sure what the other button does. I'm not going to try. Here you are with each of these. The original postcard doesn't have these names on it. I stuck those on with my PowerPoint. So here's the bookstore is in this peaked roof one. The side track for the express went in on the east side of that building. And then you had G.C. Howard Ice Cream and Soda, and the Detroit, Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor Railway Waiting Room, A.M. Humphrey, and G.L. Parsons Men's Furnishings and Shoes, and Wiedemann and Matthews Drugstore on the corner. And upstairs is the Observer. And here's the other side of the street by the same postcard man. And I didn't identify all these ones on this side of the street. And there's the interurban track right down the middle.
They have horses pulling wagons.
Plenty. Now here is your substation. The substations were put in after the line extended on to Jackson in 1901. The problem there is that the interurbans run on 650 volt DC, and the power plant you have to energize the line about every 15 miles because if you go beyond 15 miles from the power plant, the juice is so weak that it doesn't run the cars anymore. When they extended to Jackson, they used another system. They used 15,000 volt AC. They generated AC in the power plant and then sent it out on high tension lines. And then they had to put in substations every 15 miles to convert it from 15,000 volts AC to 600 volt DC. So that's why they got this substation right by the Y. The Y is where the cars turned. When they came out from Ypsilanti, they pulled in this way and then back into the station. And that's on the corner of Hall Street. And this is looking up Main Street, Chicago Road, Michigan Avenue, whatever you want to call it. And here is the track turning in on Hall Street for the Y, and the track straight through that goes up to the station. And same picture, but we've gone down and we circled onto this automobile stuck down here in the corner. But it gives you an idea of what the streets were like. This is a nice wide street. It's got a wagon track on each side and the street railway down the middle, and they all exist very nicely together. Well, see, there's that. And so this is down on Harris, corner of Harris and Main. Here's a nice Pesha photo. Pesha was a photographer in Marine City, and he wandered all over southeast Michigan, as well as staying in Marine City, and he took pictures of almost every ship that went by Marine City. So, and he was an excellent photographer, and And his photo postcards are very highly prized now. You can get them on eBay for, you have to bid up from, they usually start about $25, $50, and you bid up until you get your picture. I didn't get this on eBay, but it is a Pesha photo. He had excellent camera, excellent production, and they're the best postcards available. So here's one. This would make a good one for your collection of postcards out at the Rentschler farm. Well, that's a fuzzy postcard. Main Street after a wet snow, and all you see are the tracks and the interurban down there at the station. Otherwise, it's pretty much a whiteout. But it is Saline.
Well, you see something over there above the snow.
Here?
No, on the right.
Over here?
Yeah, what is that?
That's a church. It's a Lutheran church with the steeple that you saw in the first picture.
Okay.
Well, battling snow could be a big problem, and this is a series from the DUR archives, Detroit United Railway archives. One of their regular passenger cars, not the usual shuttle car, to bring the crew out and perhaps some of the officials. This sign up here says Town Line, which of course refers to Bemis Road, which is right down the town line between Pittsfield and whatever, South York? York. Is that York Township? Thank you. And also, of course, Maple Road comes in about there too. And there are the bosses in their hats. Looking at the hats, they are probably about 1910 or 1912 or so. You can tell in 1903, when they took pictures of the bosses, they all had top hats and round hats, and then they started wearing these ones with a dent, the Hamburg style, about 1915. Write that out. Okay. So they're on the snowplow, and they're working on this pile of snow, which is clearly 6 feet high. Clearly a heavy blizzard, the snow sweeping off the fields and getting caught in the hollow of the road. And they're having a tough time getting it cleaned up. And this is another picture of the how the road from Ypsi to Saline looked with the wagon road on the left and the railroad on the right. This is all part of the right-of-way. And again, this was a picture showing the telephone line, which had a permission to build along, the pole line of the railway. But the telephone line is tilting over and is going to run into the cars of the interurban, so they're going to tell the telephone people to get their poles straightened out. Well, this is that famous picture of old Maude, said to have been on the last day of operation to Saline. It's a little bit immaterial, and it's almost impossible to say that that was it, unless you were there. And so I was, let's see, 25, I wasn't there yet. But it's a beautiful picture for detail, for these cars that are now crowding the streets. The street is now paved. This building is now only chopped down to what, one story instead of being 2 stories. These little people are going to be climbing on the interurban car. It's old Maude. It's got a baggage compartment. Most of the cars on the line from Detroit to Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor and Jackson did not have baggage compartments, but this one did. And the 5 windows across the front tell us that it was from the 1898 order of trolley cars. This fellow over here is the switchman, and he's got this little black thing here is the switching iron. Switching iron is taken with an iron rod, and they take it down to the blacksmith shop at the car barn, and they make a loop on one end, and the other end they hammer it out flat. And the flat end goes in by the track at the switch, and then he bends the track over to turn the switch, and they're both tracks go at the same time. So this was the standard way of changing tracks, was with a switching iron. At least the tracks in the town, set in the pavement. When Emily and I were making a casual trip into Scandinavia while we were in Oslo, and they're still using switching irons like that but they have a plastic handle on them now to turn the track. This is a wonderful picture that's in the Ypsilanti Historical Society, a big picture. It's got magnificent detail. It shows a whole bunch of guys standing up on top of this dam getting their feet wet. And I don't know why they went out there, that's another story. And there's a lady sitting up here in a white dress watching the action. Otherwise, you've got this smokestack here, which is from the original powerhouse, the 1896 powerhouse, when they were making just DC power, which covered the area from Wayne to Ypsilanti, from Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor. And then they had another powerhouse in Wayne, which covered the track from Wayne into Detroit, for the Detroit, Ypsilanti, and Ann Arbor. Then when they extended the line to Detroit, they went from DC generation to AC generation and built this addition to the powerhouse with 2 more stacks. So they got 3 stacks. Only one of them is spewing black coal smoke because the other ones, they're not yet in operation. I think this is a brand new plant here. And this was the dam that was put up across the river to make it possible to pump water in for the boilers. So the power generation was to build a fire inside a boiler. The boiler makes steam. The steam goes to the turbine. It goes to the steam engine, reciprocating steam engine, which then turns a generator, and the generator makes the power, and then the power is converted to AC, from AC to DC, and that's all it takes. This is downtown Ypsilanti. Some of you will remember the Cleary College dome tower up here. It's been replaced with a business school. Here is your Saline shuttle car on the left, and the through car goes to Grass Lake and Jackson on the right, going up Washington Street. Comparison of trip times. Ann Arbor to Ypsilanti Street Railway, about 40 minutes. This is hard to determine because although I have timetables, because they printed a lot of timetables, there was a timetable in every one of the city directories that was published at that time. But the timetable says runs on city time, which is to say the Ann Arbor departures were Ann Arbor time, Ypsilanti departures were Ypsilanti time. Ypsilanti time may have been the same or different from Detroit. The railroad time was standard throughout Michigan. The railroad had to set their watches all at the same time. But local communities fixed their time on when the sun passed the flagpole on the post office or something, so that became noon. And so Ypsilanti time was about 20 minutes different from Ann Arbor time. And Detroit, I believe, actually Ypsilanti was on Detroit time, Ann Arbor was on Ann Arbor time, and the railroads were on Central time. That improved soon because they standardized the time somewhere later about, well, I'm not sure. I used to have that information. and Michigan was on Central Time along with Chicago. And then about 1930 or 31, when Michigan went on Eastern Time, originally, when they standardized the time between Central Time and Eastern Time was in Buffalo, because the railroad then ran on Central Time. But then Michigan went on Eastern Time, and Central Time started in the middle of Indiana, and then went on west. Well, Indiana's another story. So 40 minutes with the original dummy line. The DJ&C was the Detroit Jackson and Chicago division of the Detroit United. They took over in 1907. And in 1928, it took 23 minutes on the timetable. Greyhound bus in 1989 was taking 25 minutes for the same trip. Detroit to Ann Arbor on the Michigan Central was 1 hour in 1906. And by the Interurban in 1909, 2 hours and 15 minutes. They had to run out Michigan Avenue and following the streetcars, and so they couldn't make time till they got out of Detroit on their side of the road right of way. Ann Arbor to Jackson on the DJ&C Interurban was 1 hour and 10 minutes. Michigan Central, 1928, 50 minutes. Greyhound Plus, 1989, 50 minutes. And that was after the expressways went in. So the Interurban made pretty good time. They really took off when they got out of town. That's the wrong button. That's the black the screen. Okay, we're going to look at a little bit of Ann Arbor. The Detroit, Ypsilanti, and Ann Arbor, these were the early Interurban cars. This is a sweeper up front, and that was imposed by the cities. They had to put in a fender, they called it. And of course, if they ran into somebody, why that person would be knocked down and they would bounce off this wire fender so that they weren't run over by the wheels, which could be kind of disastrous. It would take off people's arms and legs and even kill them. The conductor is standing at the back of the car here because they're loading him back. The car has actually turned the corner, has not turned the corner. They had a Y down on Ann Street, and it's heading out of town. I believe that the steam dummy line also used a Y downtown. I don't have true information on that. Here's a local car operating on Main Street. It's an open car. There's the old courthouse, and this is the State Savings Bank. That became Chase now. Never mind. And on here it says baseball at the fairgrounds, 10 cents, because the cars ran right down to the fairgrounds. Here's one of the local cars. These were brought in by Detroit United after 1907, and then during the summer they had these open cars. The conductor has a double-breasted jacket on, and he collects the fares by running up and down the sideboard, the running board here, to collect the fares of the people as they get on. And here's the operator. And here they are again. The conductor in his open jacket, and the double-breasted was the operator, the motorman, and the conductor here. And on their badges, on their cap, it says motorman up here, and this one says conductor. This is DUR operation, but they had these dark blue serge suits just like the steam railroads. Local cars were brought in by the Detroit United. They're a little bit, perhaps these are 1898 models instead of 1896 models. They've filled in the front platform, but it's still pretty much like a horse car, single truck car. And they ran these on the local service in Ann Arbor till the very end for local service. They call them dinkies. Here's an Ann Arbor trolley car on the corner of State Street here, and State Street there and Packard Street here. This building is still there, and this building which was a Calkins Fletcher drugstore, is now a beer shop. I don't remember which the name of it, I don't keep track of that. The Detroit United Railways was the agglomeration of all the electric railways running out of Detroit. It was a huge undertaking, ran by they combined both the Canadian lines, the Windsor, Amherst, and down here, I can't get the names out. The Toledo line, the Port Huron line up here, Rapid Railway, the line to Flint, and up to Oxford, and the line out to Pontiac, down through to Plymouth, and the way to Northfield to Plymouth, and then this line here was called the DJ&C division. That was built then as the Detroit, Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, and Jackson. When the Detroit United took over in 1907, they called it the DJ&C, Detroit, Jackson, and Chicago. Well, the closest they got to Chicago was getting to Kalamazoo, because they ran through service with the Michigan Electric or the Michigan United, which operated these other interurban lines here, including this one up here. This line was third rail, this line was third rail, and this line was overhead. That was the last of the interurbans. I have a dotted line here. There was a fight going on between the Hawks and Angus people that were building the interurban to Jackson, and the Boland line, which was going from Grass Lake to Chelsea and Dexter and Ann Arbor to Detroit. And Boland and Hawks and Angus were both building violently at the same time, trying to be the first one to get there. Well, Boland picked up all the franchises along the main roads, along Jackson Road here out to Chelsea, along Chelsea Dexter Road, Dexter to Ann Arbor, and they were building like crazy. And meanwhile, Hawks and Angus were picking up franchise from Ann Arbor to Jackson, all in 1901. I mean, it was violent activity. Hawks and Angus got there first, they got their operation going, and meanwhile, Boland was still investing in all these other lines and ran out of money, so he never did quite get his line finished. He got the track and the wires out to Chelsea, but he never got beyond there. There's still right-of-way you can see between Dexter and Ann Arbor on the south side of Dexter Ann Arbor Road, where Boland was going to be building into Ann Arbor. Here's the Ann Arbor substation and station, right half a block west of Huron, of Main Street, with a side track for the express cars. This was for train orders. Here's some of the operators out front. The roller skating rink took over the old armory about 1915, and it survived for a whole year. The new armory is the one on the corner of 4th Avenue and Ann Street. So I can date the picture for 1950 because that's when the roller rink was there. Then it became a Packard dealership. Two-man crew for operating the cars, open platform in back, the fender up front, headlight. This one has 3 windows across the front. It's been modernized and extended. The Glazer building still exists in the back there. And here's the line from Ann Arbor to Chelsea and Jackson. They got smart about 1901 and started building their interurban not along the right-of-way of the Territorial Road, which is now Jackson Road, but they bought private right-of-way. They bought property from the farms along the line, bought property and built their railroad on their own private land. They got a parcel 2 rods wide for the entire length of their property and paid them somewhere between $150 to $300 for the for taking over that property. So here's the Jackson Road, and there's an interurban, and here's an interurban car speeding on towards Ann Arbor. They built on the north side of Jackson Road. But that gives you a pretty good idea of what it was like. Here's the Lima Center substation when it was being operated as a substation for the interurban. And it still exists. It's been made into a private residence, and I think its latest, the tile roof has been replaced with just a shingle roof, and it's now a store, or maybe an antique store for a few years. Here's the Chelsea station, the second Chelsea station. The interurban through Chelsea did not go down the main street because Boland already had the franchise for the main street, so they cut through town at an angle and had a little station here on Van Buren Street. The newspapers here, I'm guessing, are a result of dumping the newspapers from the car. And the paper boy didn't pick up after himself. There's his bicycle. Here's a crumpled Model T over here. Chelsea, the interurban came on private right-of-way diagonally through town. Most of this was swamp. Turned the corner at Van Buren and went straight out on private right-of-way through this subdivision, past the Methodist home, which is now the retirement home. Now Boland came in along the Old Jackson Road, along Wilkinson Street, along Middle Street, which was the main cross street in Chelsea. There's the main north-south, and this is the main street in Chelsea. And here's the Boland line covered with mud, because although he's got the wire and he's got the track, he never ran the cars. He never got there. So I don't know when this picture was taken, but sometime after 1901, he ran one train into Chelsea, and that was it. In the meantime, the Hawks and Angus line got their cars running, and he realized that they had the corner on the traffic. Here's another view of Chelsea with the Boland line going through the mud, and in fact, you've got a street light hanging from the dead wire. West of Chelsea, the track on the DJ&C, or the Detroit, Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor, and Jackson, went on private right-of-way next to the Michigan Central. The Michigan Central tracks are up here, and then the interurban was along here. If anybody takes the train now from Ann Arbor towards Chicago, if you look out the window on the south side, you can see the remains of that interurban right-of-way between Ann Arbor and Grass Lake. And I show this picture here because the right-of-way is along the Michigan Central here. Here's the Methodist home. This power line here, which was taken over by Consumers Power, follows the line of the interurban right-of-way. So at this corner, it turned from going across Chelsea and down along the Michigan Central. Big problem. An express car stopped at the station in Chelsea, and the interurban came by, and they pulled out of the station and moved down the line, and they couldn't see coming a passenger car until they got to the corner. They got to the corner, and they had a head-on collision with a wooden passenger car. This was a metal express car, a big one. And it plowed through the car and wiped out about 12 people, 14 total killed within a week. Most of them were military from Camp Custer. At that time, they were running through cars from Battle Creek into Detroit. And this was a weekend because it was Saturday night. Among others, some of you may remember X. Stanger, who was photographer for the Ann Arbor News for many, many years. His father was killed in this wreck. His father was Theodore Stanger. He was a friend of my dad's. He was a writer. And his daughter used to babysit us when I was a little fellow. Francisco was a small village halfway to Grass Lake, and they had a substation on the interurban. Here's the interurban over here, and here's the Michigan Central over here. I'm skipping Grass Lake to get to Jackson. I'm kind of running out of time. Here's the interurban station in Jackson, and it's now listed as showing Detroit, Jackson, and Chicago, the DJNC. So the promoters dream of building a interurban all the way to Chicago was almost actualized. They ran on the Michigan United Traction lines, the third rail lines to Kalamazoo. Here is one of their 1915 Deluxe cars. It has a third rail shoe here so that they could run through to Kalamazoo. They didn't run through to Lansing, but they did run through cars to Kalamazoo. Some of the Michigan Electrics ran through to Detroit too. So here's one of their Deluxe cars later on in a smash up by Wayne. One of the risks of running a single-track railroad with hourly service is that sometimes people make mistakes and you get a head-on collision. They did have sidings about every 5 miles so that they could pull aside and let the other car go through. And that was supposedly, it didn't always work, as you can see. And of course here you begin to see there's buses on the paved road, lots of cars. This is late, this is 1928. And the interurban was abandoned just a year later. Couldn't compete, and of course the highway's crowded. They've got the interurban track right next to the highway. And when the highway department, which was run by the state of Michigan with taxpayer money, they're building paved highways along the private right-of-way of the private company, and it's hard to compete against the state-run highways, so that the highways are serving the automobiles, and the railway is paying taxes on their right-of-way. You don't survive that way. Then the highway comes along and says, well, we're going to expand the highway, you've got to move over. And they say, sorry, we're going to quit. That's what happened to the branch to Saline. Here's another one of the problems of running high-speed electric railways past unprotected crossings. One of the Michigan Electric interurban cars from Kalamazoo ran into a truck at Hewitt and Packard. Hewitt is the first street west of Ypsilanti. It's in fact where the high school is built. On that corner. Hewitt goes all the way up to St. Joe Hospital now. But this interurban tangled with a dump truck there, and it was an unprotected crossing. You just have to be careful. Here's another one of the accidents. This is the corner of Main Street in Ann Arbor and Huron Street in Ann Arbor. Presbyterian Church there, the cookhouse, later the Allenell Hotel, and the Farmers Mechanics Bank on the corner. The curved track is from the interurban. It turns from Main onto Huron Street, and the local cars went across. In August of 1927, a night train, which was when they ran their freight cars, hauled by an express car. The express car had 4 motors, 400 horsepower motors. And the express car, 2 motors were burned out. So they had 4 trailers, and they were about 1 o'clock in the morning, and they couldn't get up the hill of Huron Street going out to Jackson with only 2 motors. So they left 2 cars down at the bottom of the hill, took 2 cars up the hill and parked them on the siding, and Glenview siding, and then they went back and picked up the other 2 cars and took them back up to hook them together, but all 4 cars got away, and they rolled down the track all the way down the Jackson and Huron Street Hill, and they were going pretty fast because steel wheels on steel rail have very low friction, and they were going anywhere from 40 to 60 miles an hour at the bottom of the hill, climbed the corner, and smashed into the bank. so they couldn't make the corner. There's what happened to the Farmers and Mechanics Bank. Well, okay, so time continues. The interurban stopped running in 1929. The substation just turned into a bus station. The Detroit United Railways stopped running interurban cars and started running buses. They called themselves the Blue Goose Lines. And here's one of the Blue Goose buses at the old interurban station. This is the, being a substation, they had these towers. They were all built the same. And that was, of course, replaced with our new bus station. And this building, this building we lost to fire. And in 1925, the local cars, the dinkies, we call these the dinkies, stopped service in January of 25. And that says south because it's going to go around campus on the south side. And they're replaced with these nice modern buses. Tracks in Ypsi were torn up in about 1942 or so. This is Michigan Avenue. Nice vintage car crossing down there. So what's the future? Well, we'll just have to see. They're making plans, and you may have read about plans. One of the Ann Arbor Master Transportation Plan of 2009 indicates a couple of corridors. One comes in the Plymouth Road corridor through downtown, south to into the sports campus. Another corridor is considered the Washtenaw corridor to Ypsilanti. Possible corridor for light rail? Well, now it's not called trolleys, not called streetcars, they're called light rail vehicles, LRV. You gotta get used to that now. It also takes a bit more than a year to build a trolley line. Paris discontinued all their surface tram cars about early, before the Second World War. They are now building light rail lines around the outer parts of Paris, and this is one of them. They run these light rail vehicles, the typical French style. They have this scoop front with a low window like that. These are high-capacity cars. They are 7 units, and each unit has 1 or 2 doors, so that when they come to the corner, the people that get off and get on before the light turns, and then it can take off. The people don't have to pass the operator up front and pay the fare, because when you ride the transit in Europe, you're expected to have paid your fare before you get on and have a receipt to show for it. Either you have a pass, a 1-day pass, or a 3-day pass, or a 1-month pass, or you have a ticket. When you get on, you validate your ticket to show that it's the time you got on it. And this is a new line. It's built down the center of one of the boulevards. It's got grass along the tracks. It's a very attractive, very nice layout. These cars are open from front to back. And the subway cars do the same thing. You can walk from one end to the other. They're jointed in 7 little pieces. Strasbourg stopped running their surface streetcars soon after the Second World War, but they have built a completely new light rail system. Started operating about 2006, I believe. Bern, Switzerland still
This has been an SCTN production.